It is an angry mailbag here on Mile High Sports here today. We're going to take a look at some things for the Denver Broncos, including questions pertaining to a potential rebuild from angry Broncos fans. You're going to get all that in today's brand new episode of Good Morning Broncos. Good morning, Broncos Country. Welcome to another episode of G&B, your daily bite-sized conversation with a cup of coffee as we talk about the Denver Broncos here. Now, look, short week turnaround for them as they're going to have to take on the Kansas City Chiefs on Thursday Night Football here. Not a lot of optimism in the eyes of the fan base, and rightfully so, until the team starts performing better or finding ways to win games versus finding ways to lose games. Fans aren't going to be very optimistic, and rightfully so. We get a lot of great questions in today's mailbag edition of G&B. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. Now, just a reminder here, we've surpassed over 3.2K subscribers here on MHS's YouTube page. Help us get to 4K by hitting that subscribe button down below. If you love Colorado sports, this is the place to be for your Broncos, Rockies, Avs, Nuggets conversation, and CU Bus from time to time. You get all that action here. Mile High Sports, every team, every day. Let's open up the mailbag here. We got several ones. You know, the thing is, when I ask for mailbag questions, we get a lot of response. I try to choose the best ones because we get a ton of questions, and sometimes a lot of the questions somehow ended up being the same. So I try to answer, 4 or 5 different people's question in one sitting if it is the same thing here. But we're going to open things up with Tyler Shyrock on today's episode of G&B. He asked the question: is Brian Griese an NFL-ready head coach? This is a very interesting conversation. I mean, obviously played in the NFL, former quarterback for the Broncos specifically, left the broadcast booth with 9 News to go over and be the quarterback coach in San Francisco for Kyle Shanahan. Look, what he's done so far, or even what Brock Purdy is doing, how much of that is on Brian Griese? I don't know. Like, I'm not a guy who covers the San Francisco 49ers, but obviously he's over there. There's a reason that Kyle Shanahan had brought him on board. Obviously, there's a trust factor there. Purdy's playing great. Griese's contributing to that, but not sure that's going to make him ready to be an NFL head coach. I honestly don't think that's going to be the case because here's the thing. He's not the offensive coordinator. He's just a guy who's the quarterback coach at this point. So for me, I don't think that's going to be in the works here for the Denver Broncos, Tyler. Yeah, great question. I mean, it's a great thing to point out there, but his name has not been brought up in terms of what you see from national media talking heads about coaches to watch for a potential head coaching job. Griese has not been one of those names that I have seen floated out there or from people that I've spoken to. So I think it is a valid question to ask here. At me, 526718880 on Twitter. That's a lot. Got to change that name to something where there's not as many numbers in there. He says, I have a question. Why in the world did Broncos fans think Sean Payton, or any coach for that matter, was going to come in and take a bad yearly last place team and win in 5 weeks? Well, okay, so devil's advocate here, right? Obviously, Denver, when you look at how Denver was with Vic Fangio, they were competitive. They weren't getting blown out of the water. Like, the only issue for them was that they just didn't have an offense. They had no quarterback. They didn't have a good offensive line. They didn't have a good run game, but they were in every game with Vic Fangio. So for me, I don't necessarily think it's definitely a team coming in and saying, okay, hey, you're going to get this coach. He's going to come in and change things right away. We've said here on this show, and if you followed me on Mile High Sports, I've said this as well. I don't be surprised if it takes 1 to 2 years for the Broncos to get where they need to be with Sean Payton. However, let me hit the pause button. If there was a sound I could play, the rewind. Denver is not off to a good start here. And this is a start that, to be honest with you, if you said that you saw this start coming, folks, you're lying. Nobody saw the Broncos at this juncture being 1-4, or at least looking as bad as they are. That, I mean, especially with a guy like Sean Payton, who's got the pedigree, who's got the reputation, who's got the track record of showing that, hey, he's a winning coach. He's damn good at what he does. But there's a process when you come in as a new head coach and you have this new team. And Denver for the last 3 years, unfortunately, is at a new head coach, new head coach, new head coach. You got to find a way to build continuity. And unfortunately, you don't have a lot of time. Like, you get thrown into the fire. And look, that's what the Broncos are going through right now. They're in the fire. And I don't know if there's an extinguisher in sight here this season for where they're at. But look, the thing is, Sean Payton himself has admitted he's got to be better. And look, he does have to be better. Players have to be better. You know, everyone wants to point the finger solely at Vance Joseph, but here's the reality of the situation. Defensive players got to tackle. They got to fill their games. They got to do their job. And Vance has got to put them in a position to succeed as well there. And that's something that Sean Payton has talked about. I don't know if we're going to see any changes now, but we could see changes soon if the same issues persist. Where Denver right now, more than likely in this next game against Kansas City, in the last 4 weeks, they'll allow over 1,000 yards rushing in 4 weeks. That's inexcusable. You can't have that happen. I don't know where the Broncos go from here. But, like I said, it wasn't going to be an overnight job here for Sean Payton. I think he knew that, but I don't think we expected them to be as bad as what we've seen so far here on tape here. We get someone from at Mile High Post. He says tanking should be the main focus and not based on his play. With this question, what can you realistically get for Russell Wilson? Assuming that the trades of Cortland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy, if that happens, some defensive pieces, it would make sense to approach Russ about a trade to a team he would like to play for. Here's the deal, though. That's not in Russ's DNA. Russ doesn't just want to up and leave. Like, Russ wants to be part of the solution here in Denver. And you also have to factor in, there is not going to be a team out there that is going to take on Russ's contract. I mean, I can't think of any, right? The Atlanta Falcons might be better suited if they struggle. I mean, you look at some of these teams that are struggling in need of a quarterback or have questions about that. They're not in a position right now where they're going to say, like, okay, hey, you know what? We're going to trade for Russell Wilson, especially with the contract, the length, and the amount of money. And on top of that, they may just look to go younger, like some other NFL team that has questions. So I don't think that you can trade Russell Wilson. And I'm not sure if he's got a no trade clause in his current contract. I'll have to double check and look that up. But no, I don't think that Russ is going to get traded at all. I don't think even if the team wanted to, I think if he does have a no trade clause, he's not going to do it. He's not going to waive it. And, it doesn't make sense to leave a destination to come here for 2 years and all of a sudden, you're like, all right, send me somewhere else. Even if Denver rebuilds or tank, they're not going to tank, which the idea of tanking is dumb, but Denver's losing games. They're not tanking. They're just losing games because they're not making plays. But aside from that, Russ could be essentially part of a rebuild if that does happen, but you'd have to require him and you'd have to approach him about restructuring his contract because, I mean, unfortunately, Denver's going to be in a tough financial position here in the next 2 to 3 years because of it there. But good luck finding any team that's going to take that on. I mean, I just don't see that happening there. This other guy says, at Mile High Bronc 0 says, is it possible that Russ may be worried about making his stats look better than his performance? It seems he's unwilling to throw the ball away in certain situations or even attempt to hit a tight window in coverage. I don't. That's not how Russell Wilson operates. Russ doesn't care about stats. I don't even know how to answer this question because it's kind of silly. Not like your question is silly, but like the idea that this is where Russ is at is silly. That's not how he is. In terms of him being unwilling to throw the ball away, look, he's a quarterback. He's trying to make plays happen. And when Denver was in a desperate, hey, you're 24-21, you're trying to make plays. Russ is trying to make plays happen. Look, and I understand it. Like sometimes you got to understand when to press, when not to press. But I think ideally he's just trying to will his team to victory. He's trying to create opportunities. And unfortunately, there's other moving pieces around you that can impact whether or not you execute that or not. So we'll see what that says. Junior G says, what does Sean tell Vance Joseph in terms of second half performances? What does Sean tell Russ about holding on the ball? Second game of the season that Russ fumbles and either swings the momentum or costs the game. Where do the Broncos go from here at 1-4? Look, I'm not going to blame this game on Russell Wilson. Obviously, he's got to protect the football, right? But the offensive line's got to protect better, right? Everybody wants to put the blame solely on Russ. And look, I think we can all sit here as honest, logical speaking adults and say, are there areas where Russell Wilson can be better? Absolutely. Is he the reason that they're losing? No, not necessarily. Can he hold on to the ball better? Absolutely here. But on that point, it's just recognizing what Sean Payton told us on Monday in our conference call with him is on that one play where the rusher came free off the right side, you got to check. He said, that's your hot. Like, that's your hot to the tailback because that guy's coming free. The running back's going to be open. Unfortunately, the pressure kind of forced him to run to the left. That guy came free. The Broncos, even Sean Payton said the offensive tackle position didn't play that well in Sunday's game against the Jets. But, you're trying to make plays, and that's the thing. And I said it's just a balance of when do you press, when do you not press. That's, I think, the way we have to look at it here. We're going through here. Orange Crush 512 says, how about we promote Christian Parker to DC and get Wade to come in as a defensive consultant? I understand making a change would be tough, but, man, we need something drastic to change on defense. And, look, Denver does need something to change on defense, but here's the reality of the situation. Denver's defensive line is not that good, unfortunately. It's not. They're struggling. They're struggling against the run. And, look, I think Nick Bonito and Jonathan Cooper, man, these guys have been good. These guys have been so good. They've been better against the run. They've been good in pass rush. But teams are running it in the A gap. They're running it in the B gap. There's not much that those guys on the outside can do about that. That's where your defensive ends, your defensive tackles. And look, DJ Jones went out of that game on Sunday with a knee injury in the second quarter, did not return. I thought for the most part when he was in there, they did a pretty solid job. Then he hurt his knee, and then everything kind of went downhill there. Denver just they might need to change the scheme here in the offseason. I'm not sure what the plan is. You can't do it now. You can't change your scheme right now in season because you've been coached, you've been practicing, you've been installing the certain system and scheme all throughout training camp. And you know the terminology. You can't just scrap it. I mean, it doesn't matter who you are here. So even if Denver were to promote Christian Parker to DC, I don't know if that would necessarily happen in season. If they were, it'd probably be in the offseason. Wade Phillips has expressed that he'd love to come back to the NFL, but I mean, I'm not sure that Denver's going to go with that route here. Denver's got issues on the personnel side. And look, when you have a scheme the way that Denver is, and the way that they're doing it, they're running a lot of what we call the underfronts that you're seeing now consistently. And a lot of it's weird because they're wide. Like the underfront is wide. There's open gaps where if you don't beat your double team, if the guard center is doubling down on the one technique, right, and then working up the play side backer, you're not getting a lot of push there, and it's creating big holes. And now you're forcing the linebackers who have to fill on those gaps in run situations. They're not able to get there because they've got an offensive lineman who's doubling down on the defensive lineman, immediately getting up to them and shielding them from being able to step and fill inside the hole. And that's where Denver's defensive line has been getting kind of kicked in the rear end a little bit. They need a true nose tackle. I don't know what the plan is. I mean, Denver's issues extend far beyond coaching. There's also some personnel issues that they have there. So I think that is a great question there. Nightmare Season Part 8 Shenanigans 3 on Twitter says, I think it's become obvious a rebuild is necessary. Do you think the Broncos sell significant pieces before the October 31st trade deadline? If so, who do you think is moved? I mean, I think that you are going to see some changes here. I mean, Sunday morning on the NFL Countdown, Adam Schefter was on, and he was talking about how the Broncos, if they continue to lose, they may look to rebuild. Not necessarily rebuild. That was not the word. But they may look to move some pieces to gain capital to try to build for the future here. Frank Clark's name was brought up by NFL Network's Ian Rappaport. Teams have called and have expressed interest in him, even though he's on a one-year deal right now in Denver. So Denver more than likely would get like a 6th or a 7th for a guy like him more than likely. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. I think teams are going to call about Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. I mean, it just depends on where Sean Payton, George Payton, and the Broncos are really at from what do they want to do? What changes do they want to make? And when you talk about personnel, like you have to have a plan. You can't just make it say, all right, we're just going to get a draft pick. You have to have a vision. Okay, if we offset and we move this guy here and we get this capital, what is our plan of attack here for the rest of the season? What are we going to do with this position? What are we going to do to maybe potentially try to replace or maybe get other guys in to make moves? I mean, I don't know what Denver's plan is, but I do think that we could. If Denver, I mean, once again, the NFL is weird. They play on Thursday Night Football. Don't think anybody in the world expects the Broncos to even have a chance against the Chiefs. We've seen stranger things happen. By some miracle, if that were the case here, it could change some things. But I think regardless, Denver sitting at 1-4 with a chance to go to 1-5 or even 2-4 doesn't change. I think them maybe looking to sell some pieces here by the NFL trade deadline. We'll see how things are at. Grigsy Bear 15 on Twitter. This is kind of a little bit of a fun one here. Would you rather get a beer with Nathaniel Hackett or Sean Payton? I'd get a beer with any of those guys. Like, here's the deal, and I've always been on the record of saying this. While Hackett did a really bad job coaching last year, great human being, very, very nice guy. Like I said, he's always been great to me. My area of being vocal about him is just how he coached last year in terms of where the team was at from a win-loss standpoint. They were underprepared. They just weren't ready. And obviously he lost the locker room quickly. But in terms of just like these human beings, like I'd love to have a beer with Nathaniel Hackett. For Sean Payton, I think he's got a great football mind. I'd love to have a beer and write down plays on a napkin, as we used to do back when I coached with, an old coaching vet of mine that, that was a mentor for me. We would sit in a bar, we'd be drinking beer, and there'd be napkins. We'd have pens like this, and we would be drawing plays with a Sharpie or a pen on napkins, and we'd be talking about how would you counter this? Like, I imagine I could do that with Sean Payton. That would be really fun there. But I'd get a beer with either of those guys, to be honest with you. KJ Collins, this will be our last one here on today's episode of Good Morning Broncos. Ask the questions. Why was Marvin Mims not targeted more? 0 deep throws is inexcusable. And look, part of it, I think the 0 deep throws, look, we've seen this now in 2 games this season with how the Raiders played Denver in week 1 and how the Jets played the Broncos here this past Sunday. There was a lot of that too high safety looks, those too high shells, and you're playing corners that were up maybe, at a maximum depth of 5 yards, and then at a minimum, maybe sometimes you would see them playing some press coverage, outside leverage there. That's why all the route concepts we saw were short to intermediate. Denver didn't even run really hardly any of those deep shot route concepts that we've usually seen so far a little bit early on this season. But yeah, you got to find a way to get Marvin Mims the football. And also part of it too, look, he muffed the punt, unfortunately. that's a play where you have to worry as a coach, like, is he going to be in his head? The end around play that we saw, like the double reverse, Sean Payton is not pinning that on Marvin Mims, and Samaje Perine took accountability for it post game in the locker room by talking about, I've got to do a better job on the exchange. Sean Payton said the exchange has to be better there. If you go back and you watch it, it was a little high there for Mims. He had to go up right here and the ball went over his head. I mean, it's not much he can do in there, especially off of his fingertips, but it's just those things you don't want to ruin the confidence of a young guy, right? And obviously, it was a tough game for him from that standpoint, but you have to find a way to get him targets in terms of the passing game and try to get some downfield shots. But Denver was, the Jets defense, they adjusted to kind of take away a little bit of what the Broncos were trying to do. And that was, hey, keep everything in front of you. We're going to play back. We're going to protect deep, and we're going to rally short because, hey, they were playing a lot of zone coverage. I didn't see the Jets outside of maybe several instances where they would send 5 or 6 players. They would go to man coverage there because you can't just send 6 players and then play zone and expect that, hey, we're going to have a guy who's going to be able to get to the quarterback in time where he's not going to be able to get the pass off in a soft zone window. You're not going to see those things happen. So when they would send pressure, they were in man coverage. But for a majority of the game, they were playing a lot of zone. They were playing some cover 4, cover 2. And Denver, unfortunately, just couldn't take any shots downfield, and nothing developed of that nature there for them. So Sean Payton has expressed a commitment here to go through and invest in being more patient with running the football, believes that they need to maybe stick with it a little bit more because then it gives them balance there. And I don't disagree with him. But unfortunately, Denver sitting here at 1-4 here. Broncos Country Thursday night football game on the road at GEHA Stadium. I'm going to call it Arrowhead Stadium against the Kansas City Chiefs. But Broncos Country, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of the show. Appreciate you so much for rocking with us. And then we're going to catch you tomorrow on a brand new episode of GMB. Denver back on the practice field. What are some of the keys that they have to invest on here this week against the Chiefs? Well, you're going to get all that on Good Morning Broncos.